If you want to start building your app idea using AI, you might be wondering what is the best tool to get started with. You've seen all of these different options and you just don't know where to start. Well, today I want to take you through all of the different categories of AI app building tools out there and tell you exactly the right tools that you should use to build your app depending on the type of app that you're building. So by the end of this video, you'll know exactly where to start building your app with AI. If you don't know me, my name is Chris, and for the last 15 years, I've been designing apps and advising startups on product and design. And with that said, let's get straight into the tools and find a way to start building your AI app today.
Build great products. Build great products.
So let's break down how to choose the right AI app builder for your app. And what I'm going to do here is, there's a lot of text on the screen, but basically I'm going to go through all of these 5 categories of AI app builder. This seems very complicated, but I'm going to break it down so it's super simple and you're going to know exactly which platform to use to build your app idea depending on what you're building and what you need. Because different platforms do offer different features and it can be difficult to know where to get started and which AI app builder you should be using. And some of them will kind of limit the development of your app over time. And so if you want to build like an app that's going to scale to thousands of customers, for example, you need to use a different set of tools than if you're building an app that's just for personal use that you're going to use on your phone. I'm also actually going to break down like another category here, which is mobile apps. So we've got 6 different categories here, which are all-in-one, front-end only, full stack, the AI IDEs, which are basically coding tools, your command line interface coding agents, which is like Claude Code, which you might have heard of, and then mobile app builders. What is the difference between all of these and why do we have all of these different categories to start off with? I'll go through each one of these with like a very quick description of what they do and why you might choose them. So to start off with, you have all-in-one platforms. All-in-one platforms, you might have seen like a Base44 or Replit. They have database, authentication, which is login and sign up. They have all of that built in, so you don't need to connect external tools. You might have heard of Supabase, which is basically a database and a back-end service provider, which you do have to connect if you're using front-end only tools. So all-in-one tools are great if you want a really simple tool to use where everything is built in and it's going to build and connect everything up for you. But there are some downsides and I will go through that a little bit later. You have your front-end only tools, which are tools like Lovable, which basically are only building what you see on the app, what you see on the screen, and they're connecting all of the visual elements together. If you've tried building an app with Lovable, for example, you might have got something back that's really, really good and it looks really nice, but actually the data and the functionality behind that don't often work properly when you just put in that first prompt and build your app, because nothing is connected behind the scenes and you do have to connect something like Supabase for your backend. Full stack is a new category, really, like an emerging category of app building tools, which basically builds all of your app, including the backend, inside the code base. And what that means is you have full ownership of all of that code. I'll go through this in a little bit more detail when we go through the examples and my choice and what each of these categories is kind of best at and why you would use one over the other. You have your AI IDEs, which is basically a coding tool. You would have heard of Cursor. And let's actually put these through as we're going in. So like all-in-one examples is Base44 and Replit. Your front-end only examples is like Lovable or Bolt, which are the 2 primary ones. And then your full stack builders, which is this new emerging category of these AI app building tools, is Leap and Kodap. There's also Emergent in here as well, which builds everything into your code base. You have your AI IDEs, which is like Cursor, which is basically like a coding tool. If you're a developer, you would use a coding tool to write your code. An AI IDE is basically an AI version of that coding tool. That's what Cursor is. So it gives you full flexibility of everything. You then have your CLI coding agents, so command line interface. So that means these are agents that run in your terminal, and terminal is just a way of interacting with anything on your computer in a very basic text interface. And the example of this that is most well known is Claude Code. Essentially, you can think of this as an AI coding agent which you can run anywhere that you can run your terminal. So a lot of the time people will run this in Cursor. So you can use Claude Code in Cursor. I know it's getting a little bit complicated, but we'll try and keep it as simple as possible. You also have Devon. Devon is an example of a browser-based coding tool, which has a coding agent built into it as well. So it kind of like fits across both of these categories a little bit. It's not a command line interface coding agent. But yeah, let's move on here. Let's go over to mobile apps. So for building mobile apps, you might have seen tools such as Rourke or Vibecode, or another one here is Dreamflow. So these are for building mobile specific apps, and mobile apps are very different from web apps. And so what I would say is like these are for web apps primarily, and then these can do any apps. So your AI IDE and your coding agent can build any type of app. And then there are some tools that allow you to build anything. So like there's a tool literally called Anything that will build mobile apps and web apps. So this is where we start to get a little bit confusing here. So then these are building only mobile apps in this category here. Anything would fit into that all in one category, basically. So this is like your rough starting point. If you want to build a web app, you're going to be looking at any of these tools. If you want to build a mobile app, you're going to be looking at any of these tools on the right hand side. So why would you choose any of these types of platforms? These all-in-one tools are best at internal apps. And what do I mean by internal apps? Internal apps would be an app that I build for my business or for my company that is not to make a profit. It's just to help me with a work process or something that I do on a day-to-day basis inside my company, or replace something that an employee is kind of doing. They're also good for personal apps. So apps that you want to run just to do something personally for you. They're also good at fun apps, which is like building something that's just a bit of fun. You're not trying to make money or turn it into a business. It's just something that you're building as a fun kind of project. So that's what these platforms are good at. My choice for this would be Replit. I think Replit is the best option if you want to use an all-in-one tool, but it can come across initially as a little bit technical. And so another option here is Mocha. This is the easiest to use. And then Replit, I would say, is the best in terms of the code accuracy and how well it builds an app. So I would say like if you're building an app for business use for like large teams or a big company, Replit is a great shout. And if you're building just a fun project that you just want to play around with an idea, see what happens, then Mocha I would say is a great place to start for that. And I would say don't use these all-in-one app building tools for large scale. I would just say like consumer apps in general. You can integrate payments into these tools, but it can be difficult and it doesn't scale very much. Now, this problem is being solved by these tools. So companies like Replit and Mocha and Base44 are working on trying to build payments into these platforms so that they can be good for consumer apps. And by consumer apps, I mean if you're building an app that you want to turn into a business, or you're building an app that you think can make a profit and people will pay money for, and you want to connect Stripe or Polar in order to take payments. And now in terms of the things that you might also need here for these all-in-one platforms, really is nothing, because it's all built in. That's the whole point of the platform. Authentication is built in. You can create user accounts. It creates database on the platform. It's all done for you. You don't need to worry about connecting any of that external stuff. So we've got all-in-one apps there. What if you want to build a consumer app? What if you want to build an app where you can accept paying customers? What platform do you build on? So let's go to these front-end only app builders. My choice at the moment is Lovable, but Bolt is a very close second. I think both of them are really good platforms to start with, and often this can just come down to personal preference. Try both of those platforms, see which ones you like best, because some people get on well with one, some people get on well with the other. I personally get on better with Bolt, so I tend to use Bolt if I'm using one of these tools. What are these front-end app building tools best at? So they're best at smaller scale consumer apps. So apps that aren't going to scale to thousands and thousands of users. You might get like a few hundred users on these platforms. Now Supabase can scale, but it does start to get a little bit expensive when you get up into larger numbers of users. And also the infrastructure isn't necessarily set up to handle larger number of users. Lovable and Bolt are also good for like internal and personal apps as well. So you can use them to build those, but it is going to take a little bit more effort. Because these apps are only building the front end of your app, you do have to connect your database, your authentication, and your payments if you're going to be accepting payments. Let's put that in the also need column down here. So what you're going to also need is basically your database, which is going to be Supabase most of the time, because most of the time these platforms direct directly integrate with Supabase. They're set up that way and they connect very easily to Supabase. Authentication, which is going to be Supabase, or Clerk, which I'm a massive fan of Clerk because it's really easy to set up Google login and sign up, but it doesn't necessarily play as well with Lovable and Bolt as Supabase does. And you're going to need payments, which is going to be Polar or Stripe. I'm a really big fan of Polar because Polar is a merchant of record. They collect taxes instead of you having to collect the taxes. If you're accepting customers from anywhere in the world, Stripe, you will have to handle the tax side of things yourself, which does make it a little bit more difficult, but most of these platforms do connect better with Stripe. That's what you're going to need here, and I would say don't use these front-end app builders for large-scale consumer apps. I would say that's like 500 plus users. You're going to be wanting to accept payments. You're going to be wanting to have like a larger number of users use that app, and you want to like turn this into an actual business. So if you're turning it into a business, then I probably wouldn't recommend using Lovable, although you could always start there. Like I'm not saying this definitely can't do that, but I'm saying I wouldn't recommend it for that. So that takes us into our next category here, which is full stack. Quick break in the episode to talk about my community for people who are building apps with AI and want to actually launch their app and get real customers. It's called the AI App Builders Academy. So if you're building an AI app with Bolt or Lovable or Cursor or any of these AI tools, and you actually want to make a profit and launch your app, then this is the community for you. Inside, you'll get access to a community of other builders, as well as my 30-day app course, helping you go from idea to app to a profitable launch in just 30 days. You'll also get access to weekly calls with live workshops and training, as well as all of my startup frameworks and resources, and 24/7 support from the community to help you answer any questions or problems you're having with building and launching your AI app. So if you're building an app with AI and you actually want to make a profit and launch your app, then head over to school.com/AI apps to find out more. I'll see you there. And so these are the full stack tools that are going to be basically building all of the functionality into a code base that you own. Why is that different from something like Lovable or Bolt? If you're building in Lovable or Bolt, your backend and your database is going to be contained in another tool, and that is going to be Supabase. Now, Supabase is basically a backend as a service for your app, which means that it is built to function in a very specific way. And so actually one thing that I'll add down here for like don't use Lovable and Bolt for is more complex apps. So things that might use like AI agents or things that have complex functionality, because Supabase and Lovable or Supabase and Bolt is very much tailored towards a more standardized format of an app. So things like dashboards with like forms, simple functionality, not necessarily anything too complex. That's where they really shine. That's where those tools really work really, really well. And again, that's not to say that they can't do more complex apps. They definitely can, but it might be a little bit more difficult for you because you're going to be having to fight against the way that those technologies are set up to work. Full stack options like Leap and Kodap. Kodap is fairly new. They're very early on in launching their app building tool, and so I would definitely recommend Leap here as my preferred choice for a full stack AI app building tool. If you're building an app where you want it to scale to a large number of users, these tools are a great place to start. And if you're building more complex apps or AI agent apps, then these are also a great place to start because they build the entire backend and everything into your code base. And so you own all of that code. With Leap, it is built on the backend setup of Encore.dev, which is the company that built Leap. And that is a backend kind of infrastructure platform. So you do have your backend set up in a specific way, but it makes it a lot easier to build a backend into your app rather than worrying about how to actually build like a Node.js backend and figure out exactly how to build the backend into your code base. And so it can be an easy way to actually like have ownership over the backend and the infrastructure in your code, but not worry too much about exactly how that's being set up. And I would say don't use these platforms if you're building a website. We actually probably want to put in like website builders as a category here as well. I'll do that in a second. So I wouldn't say don't use a full stack app builder if you're building a website. Don't use it for like personal or fun apps either. Obviously, it can be fun. If you're building a larger scale consumer app that's still fun, you can do that. But what I mean by fun is like personal projects. You're going to need some of these other things to plug in, but you won't need as many. So you're going to need your authentication, and you're going to need Polar, and you're going to need payments connected to this as well. Now, if you're using Leap has a really good integration to Clerk for authentication, and it has a really good integration out of the box for Polar. So it's really, really super straightforward to set up if you're building a full stack app and you're using Leap. That's why I think the platform is really, really good. Now let's get onto your AI IDE tools. My recommendation here is Cursor. I think there's only one winner really in this category, which is like a coding tool, which is AI first. That's Cursor. That's the kind of industry standard that everyone is using. That's the one to kind of learn and get familiar with if you want to do this. And these tools are really best at like any sort of code, debugging and code reviews and building anything really. But the negatives here is that they're very technical, which means that they're harder to learn because you basically have to learn code a little bit if you do this. You have to understand the structure of code, how your project is set up, what coding languages you're using, and that can be a barrier to entry for a lot of people. Don't use this if you're just building simple apps and you have no coding knowledge. And don't use this if you're not sure or haven't used any AI coding tools before. If you're non-technical, it's a very difficult place to start using Cursor, and it's actually a lot easier to kind of play around with using some of these other easier platforms like Replit or Lovable, and then go more towards this full stack and AI IDE kind of categories to actually build your apps. Basically, you need like anything else you want to build in here, you can, which is basically going to be all of this stuff. You can build a database in your code base, but you will need authentication and payments. And the best way of doing authentication and payments is by using other technologies to plug into your app, but there's also unlimited possibilities here. You can kind of build anything into your app as long as you know like what it is, or you can even ask Cursor to help you figure out the technologies and the things you need to build into your app to get the functionality that you want. And so that is the AI IDEs. Let's go on to the CLI coding agents. So these are terminal-based coding agents that live where you can run them in the terminal. It's just a text interface, just chat with them. Claude Code is the best coding agent, command line interface coding agent at the moment. A lot of people, myself included, run Claude Code in Cursor. You basically open a terminal in Cursor and then you run Claude Code in your terminal. That gives you visibility of your entire project and allows you to use Claude Code to write the code into your project. And these are really best at like any complex coding task, really like any coding task, to be honest. And they're also great at planning your entire project and getting started. I think these are like a really good place to start if you're building a more complex app where you need like a lot of specific features in. This would also be like best for people with a clear idea of what they want to build. And I mean that from like a technology standpoint rather than like the actual app idea itself. So if you know the technology that you need to build into your app, then Claude Code is a really great place to start. I would say don't use this for, again, it's like the same as Cursor here. It's more technical, which means that it's harder to learn. I'm going to change this to say more technical because these tools aren't necessarily very technical. They're just a little bit more technical. And actually Claude Code is very straightforward once you start using it. But once you start getting into building your app, you're going to come up against more and more walls where you will need to maybe know a little bit of information about stuff or the foundations of like how code is set up to understand a little bit of what it's doing. I wouldn't really use this necessarily unless you're familiar with it or you're familiar with code. And I wouldn't really use this for simple apps or if you have no coding knowledge or if you're not sure or haven't used any AI coding tools before. And again, the same with Cursor. You can build anything else in here that you want. You're going to need things for authentication and for payments, but again, there's kind of unlimited possibilities for what you can build. I started building a music production desktop app using Claude Code, and there are people in my community who've built browser extensions and other stuff using Claude Code as well. So this is a really good place if you're building something that's not just a web app or not a mobile app. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a desktop application or a browser extension. You might want to use Claude Code, or you're building like a more complex app, or you're just really familiar with code. Mobile apps, you've got Rourke, Dreamflow, Vibe Code. At the moment, I would say my preference is probably Dreamflow or Vibe Code. I would say Vibe Code is more for like simpler or personal apps, and I would say that Dreamflow is more for like consumer apps, so with payments, that sort of stuff. So Dreamflow is basically from the team behind Flutter, which is a way of building mobile apps for Android and iOS just from one code base. They have a tool like a vibe coding, like AI app building tool called Dreamflow, which is also works with Flutterflow, which is like their web-based app building tool as well. Dreamflow is really good if you want to build consumer apps. You still need to integrate some other stuff into this, but it's a really in-depth tool that gives you a lot of control over the app that you're building. So I would get started there if you're looking at building consumer apps. But again, if you're using something like Code or Rourke or any of the other tools, A0 is another one, you can still do this. You just have to go a little bit further. You might have to take it out of the platform and then put it into Cursor to actually start integrating payments and stuff like that. So what are these tools best at? So obviously these tools are best at building mobile apps, and they're best at building, for like the simpler one, I would say these tools are generally good for building personal apps, which you can use for your own kind of workflows and stuff. You can build like consumer apps here as well, but they're not great at building them. But basically the technology isn't quite there yet for consumer apps to allow you to do it all in one place, and the mobile app AI coding tools are kind of a little bit further behind the web-based coding tools at the moment. So they're going to get there, but there's still a little bit of development that they need to build in some of these other features and stuff. And I would say don't use this for any web apps, and don't use this for things like desktop apps or browser extensions. This is only for mobile apps. And what things do you also need if you're building using one of these mobile app building tools? You're going to need a database, which you can use Supabase for, or you can build the database into the code of your app. You're also going to need authentication, which you could probably use Supabase for if you're connecting your database with Supabase as well. You're also going to need payments, which I would use for this Superwall, which is basically a paywall service, which allows you to put a paywall into your app, and then you can make changes on your paywall without needing to actually resubmit a new version of your app to the App Store or the Play Store. And then you're going to need a tool here to actually launch it to the App Store and Play Store as well, which I would use Expo Launch, which is just recently released, which basically allows you to put a GitHub repository into it and then publish that GitHub repository as your app to the App Store or the Play Store. So you're also going to need GitHub here as well, which is a place to store your code. And I'm going to add GitHub to these other ones as well, because I would also recommend using GitHub for any of these apart from the all-in-one platforms. So that is my breakdown of all of the different types of coding tools. Hopefully that helps you understand where you should get started depending on the type of app that you're building. And so if you're building an internal or personal app, then Replit is a great place to start. Or you're building a fun app. If you're building a smaller scale consumer app where you want to take payments but you might not get that many users and you don't necessarily want to scale it into a business, then Lovable or Bolt is a great place to start. If you're building medium to large scale consumer apps, then something like Leap is a really good place to start. If you want to build something more custom and complex, then Cursor with Claude Code is a really combination to start using. And then if you want to build a mobile app, then you can use something like Code, or you can use something like Dreamflow to build that, and then you can integrate these other tools by taking that code. You'll need to basically take this code over to like Cursor to integrate other tools, and then launch that app to the App Store using Expo Launch. And I'll do another video breaking down a bunch of different ways to build and launch mobile apps in the future as well, so keep an eye out for that. Hopefully that helps, and let's get into my final thoughts. So that was my breakdown of all of the different types of AI app building tools out there and which tool you should use to get started building your app idea. Now, if you want to get started building your app and actually start making a profit from it, I have a community to help people do exactly that, and you can find out more by going to school.com/AI apps. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Build great product. Build great product.